Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm 12 Kyle. Check this out. On this podcast, what I want to talk about is a place that may be unfamiliar to a lot of you who are listening. That place is the record store. Now, some of you may be wondering, okay, what is a record store? And as strange as that may sound, the idea and the concept of actually going somewhere to actually purchase a record or a CD or a tape is foreign. And quite honestly, there may be a few of you who've never set foot inside of a record store. So allow me to take you down memory lane a little. um I came to this topic because obviously, if you've been following the podcast, a lot of times what I'll do is on this podcast, I have stories and, ideas and podcasts and shows about, what life was like prior to, the digital era or the internet era, if you will, because my generation was a generation of kids who grew up without the internet. But there's an actual closer tie to this podcast to a closer generation. And what I mean by that is my son, middle son, he, at the time of this recording, he's 19. His name is Cameron. Cameron, this past Christmas, got a record player for Christmas. He had expressed to us in quite a few not so subtle ways that he was interested in purchasing vinyl. And he wanted to start a vinyl collection. And the kid is a huge hip hop fan. So, he had, I don't think he knew we were getting that for Christmas, but he had dropped the hint a few times. I was like, that'd be a dope Christmas gift, get him a record player, get him some records. Right. So, the idea behind this podcast kind of stemmed from that. So he got his record player for Christmas, of course, unbeknownst to him, he had no clue. And what I did was I purchased some records for him. Now, I bought 4 records, and I want you to take a listen to the records that I purchased for him. 1, Midnight Marauders by A Tribe Called Quest. 2, Forest Hill Drive's album, the Forest Hill Drive's album by J. Cole. 3, the Music Aquarium album by Stevie Wonder, which was a compilation of, I think, 7 of his greatest albums, like some of the bigger hits off of those albums. And there's a story about that album, and I'll tell you in just a second. And then the 4th album that I bought was Enter the 36 Chambers by Wu-Tang Clan. I know what you're thinking. That's that's an interesting collection of music. It's a very eclectic, if you will, collection of music, but it actually represents, a lot of what he listens to. I wanted to get him a Tribe joint because, I love Tribe, and I knew he'd love Tribe too. And obviously he's heard this music before. He's heard Midnight Marauders before, but I knew that it would sound dope on vinyl. He's a huge J. Cole fan, so I had to get him the Forest Hills album. The Music Aquarium album, again, like I said, it's a compilation of Stevie Wonder's classic hits. I wanted to get him that album because I wanted him to hear Stevie Wonder on vinyl. Of course, he's heard me play music and heard me play Stevie's music a lot, but I wanted to get that album in particular because that was an album that was in my house as I grew up as a child. My parents had mad Stevie Wonder records. I know, like, the favorite records that I used to play from Stevie was the Hotter Than July album and obviously Songs in the Key of Life. And then we had this Aquarium album. Well, we had all of the albums, but I just remember playing those. I must have been like 9, 10 years old. I just remember playing them all the time, singing Stevie songs. Um, and then so I had to get him that. And then the 36 Chambers. This kid is a huge Wu-Tang fan. so um so I had to get him those albums. So after I did that, a couple of weeks later, he went and bought some albums on his own. He went and bought Illmatic by Nas, ATLiens by Outkast, and Straight Outta Compton by NWA. So he's building himself a little collection and everything. And as you can see, he's a huge hip hop fan. But he went on his own, and well, actually went with his girlfriend, and they went to a store downtown called Criminal Records, aptly named Criminal Records, here in Atlanta, and he bought these albums. But anyway, I said all that to say this: the idea and the concept of records got me to thinking about the record store, because I took Cameron and his two brothers maybe about 3 years ago. I took them to a record store. I actually took them to Criminal Records, and that was the first time that they had been in a record store. And I was just trying to explain to them, like, the record store was everything back in the day. At least for me, it was. First of all, shopping at a record store was always fun. Like, I can't ever recall going to a record store and not having fun. And I mean, like, for me, if you follow this podcast, you know that I'm a huge music fan. So that goes without saying. So, and subsequently, I know just from conversations that I've had with a lot of you on social media, you're music fans as well. So I think the record store for me was a place where I was able to cultivate the love that I have with music. Because honestly, I could go, and I would go in a record store, and I literally would spend hours in the record store. Now, what was interesting was, especially in my formative years in middle school and high school, and even in college, like, it wasn't, I mean, in college I had a little bit of money, but in high school, if you were lucky, you had enough music, you had enough money for 2 tapes, maybe, if that, right? So for the most part, if you're going in a record store, you're just going to get one thing. And that's it, because that's all you can afford. But again, shopping, at least for me, was always fun, because half of the fun was just looking at the albums. One of the ways that we shopped, and I've said this before, me and my man Eclectic talked about it. One of the ways you shop was just, you would buy stuff just based on the album cover. Like, if it had a dope album cover, you might cop it, and it's just like, you didn't even think nothing of it. Because again, this was before the advent of technology, so there was nobody to tell you, like, hey, you need to get this or don't get that. So a lot of times, we just bought music based on the album cover. So, I remember seeing LL Cool J on on his album cover for the album Bad, Bigger and Deffer. And I thought it was dope. He was standing on top of the hood of a car with a school behind him, and he had on these dope Air Jordans. And I mean, of course, at that time we knew who LL was, but still, like, his album cover was crazy. Ice-T had a crazy album cover. Shout out to Darlene. Oh, and who could ever forget the album As Nasty as They Wanna Be from Uncle Luke and the 2 Live Crew. That might be one of the greatest album covers ever. But I said all that to say this, like, you still bought the albums just based on, just what you saw. Um, and especially, in the early to mid 80s, there weren't even a lot of videos for some of these albums that we bought. So you either bought the album or the tape. Because at that time CDs weren't even out. So more often than not, when I was in middle school, I bought tapes. I'm saying albums, but I bought tapes. Um, but like I said, you would spend hours. At least I would spend hours in a record store. Um, Again, this was before the advent of the internet. So when I bought tapes in the mid to late 80s, there was no reviews. There was no source. I mean, well, I take that back. The Source magazine did exist, but I don't think I read my first Source magazine until, like, I know I was in college. So that was like early 90s. So that's like 91, 92. So, you know, the Source would factor in later, but, there were no websites because there was no internet. So there was nothing to tell you like what to buy. What we relied on was word of mouth. So if I got the new Beastie Boys tape, which I did, and I thought it was dope, I'm gonna tell my boy Zell, like, yo, you need to hit his. You got that Beastie Boys? No, I don't have it. Hey man, you need to get that. That joint is dope. And that's how albums and tapes were sold, on word of mouth, on the strength of like somebody having something and knowing that it was dope, and then they tell their friends. Um, and that's really how we got our music. Um, and like I said, the people, your friends, normally let you know what to buy and subsequently what not to buy. Because we did buy some albums and tapes that just really weren't up to par. But for the most part, I can honestly say most of the stuff that I bought was pretty solid, pretty dope. Um, that was just the times and the era that we were in. And another thing that made that era so dope and what made the record store so dope was exclusivity. And what I mean by that is, like, if you copped a tape or an album, you may or may not tell folks where you got it from. And so for you to have something that nobody else had and none of your other friends had, well, that made you the man. I mean, like, that made you dope as hell, particularly if you had something and you had something that was really, really dope and nobody else had it. And, even worse, if they didn't know how to get it. Oh man. And that kind of kind of reminds me of my man Eclectic. You guys have heard him on here a gazillion times and heard me on his podcast. Um, I always say about his podcast, like, he will play music on his podcast. And sometimes I have to text him like, yo, what song is that? Like, it's stuff that I've never heard. And I'm pretty sure, I'm 99.9% sure that this is music that he just has. And it's music like that nobody else. And I'm not saying that he has exclusive music, but what I'm saying is he has the remixes of the remixes that a lot of people haven't heard. And this is just in his personal collection. But yeah, being able to, get music and have it exclusive just to you made you, even doper. And then ultimately, if you had something or had some music, a tape or an album that, let's say, your friends had, or vice versa, let's say your friend had something that you didn't have, what are you going to do? First thing you're going to do is ask, hey man, can I cop a dub? And what we mean by copying a dub, back in the day, they you had a tape, and then they started selling these boom boxes with dual cassette players. And the dual cassette players allowed you to play a tape in one tape deck and record it in another tape deck and put it on another cassette tape. So my boy, like, I'll give you an example. My boy Jay Fresh was the first person that I knew that had the dual cassette players. So if you had a tape, he could, you know, dub it for you and put it on a blank tape, or if you wanted to tape over another tape or whatever the case may be. But Jay Fresh was real stingy. I remember Jay Fresh. He was the first person that I ever. He might have been the first person in our hometown. He was the only person that I knew that knew and had the Easy E tape. And I'm talking about this might have been Easy E and NWA, like the first joint, like even before Easy's solo album came out. He had a tape, and I just remember he was playing it, and I was like, "Yo, who is it?" He's like, "Man, it's NWA, this Easy E." And I was like, "Yo, let me get a dub." He was like, "Nah." And I was like, "Why not?" He's like, "Man, because you be stealing from the artist. You need to pay the artist their money." I was like, and I mean, like, we must have been in, like, I don't know, 7th, 8th grade. I'm like, "Yo, man, if you don't cop me a dub, I'm gonna kick your ass, man." Like, what are you talking about? Pay the artist. I'm a teenager. I have no money. But yeah, Jay Fresh was real stingy like that. Sometimes he would not let people cop a dub. But for the most part, if you had a tape, he'd get you, he'd dub it for you or whatever like that. He would find like really, really, kind of out of the way music. Like he was the first one. Like I remember we were in 7th grade and he was crazy about Tough Crew. Like who the hell is Tough Crew? Shout out to Philly. But yeah, he was crazy about Tough Crew and 783. I mean, like he'd find these nondescript rappers and just love them. But they were dope, and so ultimately you wanted to cop a dub so you could have it for yourself. But all of that stuff transpired because of the availability of the music at the record store. So if you had access to a record store and if you could get your hands on stuff that nobody else could get your hands on, again, that made you the man. Now the flip side of that is when an album sells out, the last thing that you want a record store to say is, "Oh, we're sold out of that." Okay. So young people, let me explain something to you. There was a time that record stores would get tapes and albums and CDs for that matter. And if the record store sold out of their copies, that was it. Like there was no, "Yo, can I get, such and such?" "No, we don't have it." "Oh, okay, well, let me get this." "No, we don't have it." Like, and the crazy part about it was by the early 90s, the demand for music was such that you really had to get the music when it came out. Because if you didn't, you ran the risk of going to the record store and them selling out, and then you had to wait. Like I'll give you an example of 2 albums. 1992 Dr. Dre's The Chronic, 1993's Doggy Style by Snoop Dogg. I know people, I wasn't one of them, but I know people who did not get these albums the first week that they came out. And they had to walk around our campus on the campus of South Carolina State University for a week without The Chronic or Doggy Style. Do you know how lame you would feel if you didn't have The Chronic or Doggy Style when it came out? I remember distinctly, and I've talked about it on this podcast, and it's worth repeating. Doggy Style, the albums normally would come out on Tuesday. I went to the record store because the date, the release date got pushed up to a Friday. So I went to, I think it was Camelot Music at the mall in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And I went to the mall, and because the album was coming out on Friday, so the store actually opened up at midnight. So they closed at 9. Then they opened back up at midnight just so people would come and get, Doggy Style. And I got there like 11:30. And by the time I got to the store at 11:30, now keep in mind the store has not opened because it's 11:30 p.m. The store is going to open at 12 a.m. so that you can purchase Doggy Style. The line was out of the mall and around the corner of people waiting on Doggy Style. And the album sold like 830,000 copies in the first week. And I mean, like in the first week, meaning in the first like 4 days. So just imagine calling the record store and saying, "Hey, you got that new Doggy Style? No, we out." And I mean, everybody had that album, and so you would have been like so lame for not having that album. But like I said, that's something that this generation won't obviously experience because one, there's no such thing as not having availability because, yeah, if I wanted to purchase songs in the key of life, maybe the record store that I go to won't have it, but I could still order it online. I could order it off Amazon and it may take a little longer. It might take a week. And, sometimes particularly with vinyl, and I was explaining this to Cameron that sometimes with vinyl, um, you know, the music is on back order, and if there's not a strong demand for it, you may not get a lot of vinyl copies pressed, and so it's kind of hit or miss for some albums. But for the most part, people who collect vinyl, they, from what I can tell, they do a pretty good job of getting the albums that they want. But yeah, this generation, you'll never understand, what it would be like to, and the pressure of knowing that, hey, an album is coming out, Illmatic is coming out, Mary J. Blige, What's the 411 is coming out this Tuesday. I have to get my $9.99 together. And I've got to make plans to get to the record store before they sell out. I mentioned the source a little earlier. Reviews and previewing music was something that happened in the 90s, and it changed the game. Obviously, if you follow hip hop, the source was considered to be, and it prided itself as being self-proclaimed hip hop's Bible. I love reading the source, and honestly, when I would get the source, or even if I didn't buy the source, if I saw it in a record store or anywhere else, the first thing I do is look at the cover, and then I'd open it and I go straight to the album reviews section at the back of the magazine because I wanted to know. And my taste in music was very similar to, the rating that people had in the source. So if the source gave it 4 mics, I'm probably buying it. If the source gave it 4.5 mics, I'm definitely buying it. And suffice to say, if the source gave it 5 mics, I got it. But, even in saying that, I mean, like, it was a big deal for an album. We talked about this before, an album to get 5 mics in the source, because obviously, like, that's saying that this album is a hip hop classic and it's perfect. Now, I have a certain feeling about the word classic and how much is thrown around hip hop in it, but I don't have time to talk about it. That's a whole nother podcast for another day. But I will say this much. With that being said, the reviews and stuff drove us to the record stores to purchase these albums. And then by the mid to late 90s, some record stores had it to where you could actually preview the album before you could buy it. What I mean by that is, like, they had these stations where you would have some headphones set up, and let's say Mary J. Blige's My Life is there. And so you press the button and it would allow you to listen to a 30-second clip of every song on the album. And, a lot of times that would influence people as to whether or not they would or wouldn't buy the album. Now, for me, I was okay on that because, like, for me, 30 seconds isn't enough for me to make a determination whether or not a song is dope or if it's whack. But it helped a lot of people. But being able to preview the music really made a difference. And it influenced how much music was purchased and things of that nature. Um, one of the places that did that a lot was Tower Records. I love Tower Records, man. Tower Records was one of those places that you literally could spend 2-3 hours in Tower Records for real. And I mean, like, everybody, no matter which Tower record you go to, at least the ones that I went to, everybody was always mad friendly. You strike up conversations with the people that work there. And if they got to really, really know you, you got to, sometimes they put music away for you and stuff like that. So, um, but being able to listen to the music and then also, reading reviews, that definitely drove us to record stores to make purchases. Um, and last but not least, man, I would be remiss if I did not shout out some of my favorite record stores. The one that I probably spent the most money in, which is still here to this day in my hometown, Ray's Records in Florence, South Carolina. It's still there, still same spot. I don't even know if it's the same management. It's funny because Ray's was a record store that they would sell obviously records, tapes, CDs. They also sold comic books. So like you could go and Ray's, man, and it wasn't a really, relatively speaking, it really wasn't a huge store, but man, me and Jay Fresh would go in there, man. We would spend at least an hour just walking around, and you got to know the people that work there and everything, and just carry on conversation. It was almost like the hangout spot, really. Where else? Manifest Records was dope back in the day. That they were in my hometown in Florence, South Carolina, also in Columbia, South Carolina. Camelot Music was dope. Used to spend a lot of time at Camelot, that record store. Of course, the aforementioned Tower Records. Like I said, Tower Records is probably one of my favorites. Can't forget Electric Fetus. Electric Fetus is this really, really dope record store in Minneapolis. As many of you know, I lived in Minneapolis for a year and lived and worked in Minneapolis. And man, Electric Fetus is so. I used to go to Electric Fetus like a couple of times a week. It was so dope. They've got a couple of different locations in Minneapolis. But I used to always go to the main one downtown, and love that spot, man. Love that, man. You could buy clothes in Electric Fetus. Super, super dope spot. If and when I ever go back to Minneapolis, that's going to be the first place that I go in the Plainlands. I promise you. Also, the now defunct is no longer here, but Earwax Records used to be a spot called Earwax right here in the city of Atlanta downtown. Man, I used to love going into Earwax, man, because everybody in there was mad cool. I knew a couple of cats that worked in there, and like it was almost like a reunion every time I go in there. Like I remember going in there and I bought like 7 CDs one time. And I went in, got the CDs, and I paid for the CDs probably within 2 minutes of being in the store, right? Put the CDs in the bag, walked them out to the car, put the CDs in the car, came back in the store and spent an hour and a half just talking to people. Man, I was crushed when Earwax went out of business, man. I was crushed. But yeah, those are some of the spots, man. I've spent quite a bit of money in record stores, and if you're of my age or my era, you probably did too. If you are young enough or had to not have experienced that, do yourself a favor. Go to a record store. I promise you, it will be an experience. That's going to do it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. This podcast is being released every Thursday at midnight. From time to time this year, we will be releasing new episodes, bonus episodes on Sundays at midnight as well. Also, check out the YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/ spell it out, TWELVEKYLE. Got stumped there for a second. To check out the YouTube channel as well. So do yourself a favor and do that as well. Again, I'm your boy 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5G.